So, it's my birthday and I have turned 14 years old. So therefore, I am going to I'm going to share with you my 20 favorite movies of all time for my 14th birthday. And so here's my ranking. Hi, my name is Nathan, and I talk about a bunch of movies on this channel. If you're new here, down below in the comment section, share your picks for your favorite movies of all time. Our list may be different because we resonate with different movies. We've seen different movies. Just share your favorites down below in the comment section because we all have different movies that we absolutely love. Over on my channel, I have more content like this. Check those out once this video is over. Click that like button. Be sure to subscribe. With that said, let's get started with the ranking. Kicking off our top 20, Aliens. This is a much more action-based Alien movie, but I really like action sequences, and so James Cameron delivers more action in this movie than there was in the first one, as the first one was much more of a horror slasher movie where the characters slowly start getting killed off, and this one is more of an action-based alien movie. But what really elevates this movie to be on this list is that it adds a layer to the Ripley character about how this little girl plays into her life and that she will do everything in her way to protect her.
Get away from her, you bitch!
And becomes less roughened. She becomes more maternal. It's an incredibly satisfying film and with a compelling story for the Ripley character. It has so much more excitement than the original while not being a horror movie. But really, like I said, the emotional aspect and that arc for Ripley really elevates this movie to the next level. And so to me, this is my favorite of the Alien movies. Number 19, The Karate Kid. The original Karate Kid is just a fantastic sports movie from the 80s. It's a very simple yet compelling story, just basically about this boy and his karate master connecting, finding family in unusual places. It's a heartfelt film. It's incredibly satisfying. It also introduced us to some of the most iconic characters. Mr. Miyagi, of course, Daniel LaRusso, of course, Johnny Lawrence, John Kreese. It introduced us to those characters, and it started this long-running franchise with Cobra Kai continuing on as the legacy sequel TV show in this franchise that me and my family absolutely love. Can't wait for the next season of it, even though the writer strikes have been affecting it quite a bit. But this is just a classic underdog story that I thought was executed very well, and it has remained a classic sports movie, a classic film of the genre. Number 18, Jaws, the very first summer blockbuster film, still remains one of the greatest movies of all time. That just has a very interesting concept about a beach that is in danger because a shark attack happens all of a sudden, and it's executed very well, possibly perfectly, as it provides all of the edge of your seat thrills you want from a concept like this. But it also just has some great characters and their dynamics, and it actually has journeys for the characters. And so you get the everyman Brody, who gets swept away into this adventure alongside Hooper and Quint, and when they're on the boat, the Orca, they just have some great dynamic with each other that's interesting to see. And of course, there's a very simple, memorable score that just winds up the tension every time it comes up. It's a very important film for Steven Spielberg. It made Steven Spielberg very popular, and he's got a whole bunch of movies that I absolutely love, and Jaws is one of them. Next up is Avengers Infinity War. As you might know, I absolutely love the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and this is my favorite film in that franchise. That was just the culmination of a decade's movie's worth of build-up, and it absolutely worked and lived up to all the hype and paid off. Right off the bat, it's just a lot of fun to see all these characters interact, whether you're talking about our Avengers, Tony Stark, Spider-Man, bringing in some characters from Doctor Strange, as well as the Guardians of the Galaxy.
You're from Earth. I'm not from Earth, I'm from Missouri. Yeah, that's on Earth, dipshit.
Back in 2018, that was a big thing. Like, I was 8 years old, I saw this movie in the theater. It was just phenomenal. There was also just a great villain in Thanos. While he is this psychopath that you absolutely want to see taken down, there's something in Josh Brolin's performance and the way that he's treated in the film that makes him a little bit sympathetic. The ending, even in the theater, was truly shocking to me. Once the credits started rolling, I was just like, wait, that's it? I didn't expect the movie to end there. And so, this is a movie that's everything a modern blockbuster superhero movie should be, and it was followed up by Avengers Endgame, another movie I saw in the theater, and I absolutely loved, but I think Infinity War was the one that was more effective to me. And then we have Predator, another creature feature with a fairly simple concept about these people that just go in the forest with machine guns and start slowly getting killed off by a creature that they don't know and understand, but it's executed in such a great way, as it sort of starts off a little bit slow, but then gets better and better the more it progresses, and things get crazier and more people start getting killed off and the body count is higher as the audience learns more about the Predator. Our lead character, Dutch, learns more about the Predator as well, and thus, when you get to our final showdown between Arnold Schwarzenegger's Dutch and the Predator, and they duke it out, it feels earned and satisfying, because Dutch, instead of just punching the Predator in the face, because, like, he can't do that, instead he uses these strategical methods in order to defeat the Predator, and therefore the ending is satisfying, and it feels like it makes sense in light of everything set up previously in the film. And so this is just a fantastic movie that's thrilling and edge of your seat from beginning to end. And then we have Dumb and Dumber. This is my personal favorite comedy of all time, and of course in the lead is Jim Carrey, who is my personal favorite comedy star of all time. Some people go Adam Sandler. I personally would go Jim Carrey, because he just has these hyperactive, memorable performances in all his movies. But the one that's always stood out to me is Dumb and Dumber. I saw this movie for the first time when I was like 8 years old, and my dad decided to show it to me because he said it was really funny and I'd be laughing, and he was absolutely correct, and so I've loved it ever since. This might be the movie I've watched the most. It's so good, so rewatchable, so entertaining.
Mockingbird, don't everybody have you heard?
But even so, it's also because he's perfectly paired with Jeff Daniels, who, like, he just gives it his all. Even though he's not really known for the comedy area, he just gives it his all alongside Jim Carrey. It's just, it makes you laugh throughout from beginning to end. Memorable sequence out of memorable sequence. Very rewatchable film. And so to me, this is my favorite Jim Carrey comedy. And that brings us to Inception. This is just, to me, the ultimate great example of what Christopher Nolan does really well, is that he takes pretty much a simple concept at face value, where you get a set of characters that are trying to perform a heist, and turns it on its head and has these weird, interesting ideas, and to me it absolutely worked. This one being about them going into people's dreams, and through that there are just some really creative visual sequences with, like, there's a sequence where a fight goes on in a rotating room, and how streets collapse in on each other, and there's just some awesome visuals like that throughout. But it's also a movie where it has several moving parts in the plot that can have multiple interpretations of it, therefore just making it a fascinating film to watch in general. And so to me, this is what Christopher Nolan does really well, and it's one of the most innovative and creative films in the past 15 years. Number 13, Superman. This was the first superhero movie blockbuster, as in it's the first movie where they spent a bunch of money on a comic book project, and I thought, as somebody that loves comic book movies so much, this is just a very important film to the comic book movie genre that's incredibly important and groundbreaking at the time it was released. Granted, it was released 45 years ago, and so it might still be dated, but also, whenever I rewatch this movie, it just feels timeless as it is, and there's just several elements to that. Like, Christopher Reeve's casting as Superman is an iconic casting of a character, so much so that, like, my YouTube page, like, the profile picture of it is Christopher Reeve's Superman, and also Lex Luthor's played by Gene Hackman, and he's just this memorable, cunning little mastermind that has a big brain, and he could go off against Superman without having to punch him in the face or anything like that. And so, very simple plot, not a lot of events happen, but it's executed really well and remains one of the most important movies in the comic book genre. Call me crazy down below in the comment section, but for me, number 12 is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. This was a film that when I saw it in the theater, it was so much better than I could have possibly imagined. Now, Tom Cruise is probably one of my favorite actors of all time, maybe my favorite actor of all time, and I just thought this was Tom Cruise peak. Like, this movie only came out like a couple months ago, and I thought it was just a fantastic addition to the Mission Impossible franchise, and a fantastic action movie in general. Of all the Mission Impossible movies, I would say it has the most memorable story about the AI, and it's the most entertaining, despite being almost 3 hours, and it has the best action of the franchise that already had amazing Tom Cruise action and stunts, and also just some great compelling characters, old and new, whether you're talking about Ethan, Benji, Luther, Ilsa, but then you also add in Haley Atwell as Grace, which has some great dynamic with Ethan Hunt. But also, the movie has just some personal stakes where you feel the danger and the urgency because it ties back to Ethan Hunt, our lead character. And so this movie proved to me that Tom Cruise, while being 60 years old now, still at his prime and could still do the crazy things that you want in a Mission Impossible movie. And so this was a recent addition to my favorite movies list. Number 11, Forrest Gump. When it comes to Forrest Gump, it's just a very compelling drama, basically just about a guy's life, but ends up being one of the greatest movies of all time, as you have an incredibly human lead character who does very foolish things throughout the movie, but does so in a way that still makes him charming, likable, and ultimately human. And every single character in this movie has a character arc. Like, Forrest Gump does so many foolish things, but ends up finding happiness in life. We're talking about Jenny, who has a real downfall in life and manages to get herself back up again. Lieutenant Dan, of course, has a great arc where he restores his faith in life. And it's just every single character is compelling, and that's what I really enjoy about this movie. It can be really funny at times with the revisionist history, and so this, even after 30 years of its release, still holds up and remains one of the greatest movies of all time. Kicking off the top 10, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Just a fantastic sequel to the first film on every single level, as it's larger. It's a larger film in general in the scope, the size, the scale, as the action set pieces are a lot bigger in this one as they had a higher budget. But also, it's just a great emotional sort of character journey for Sarah Connor as well as the Terminator, as we have the T-800 who becomes more human at the end of it, becomes less of a machine, and learns the significance of human life, and Sarah Connor, who finds humanity after sort of going crazy after the events of the first Terminator. It also expands more on the mythology, as now there's these liquid Terminators, the T-1000 coming in. There's some awesome action sequences, and the way they did visual effects was very creative, especially in 1991 for this movie. And so this movie, just one of the great movie sequels of all time that remains an icon in cinema to this day. Number 9, Rocky. The greatest sports movie of all time that just laid the foundation for a bunch of future sports movies to come, and it's just a fantastic film in general that it was the quintessential sports movie at the time, and it still is today, as there's just some very compelling characters, especially the lead, Rocky Balboa, who's just a guy that he never thought he could live up to the potential that he always wanted to, and when he's given an opportunity to actually be in an actual boxing match, he takes it, and by the end of it, he loses. But the movie wasn't about if he could win or not. It was about if he could be the best possible version of himself and accept that he has the potential to be so great. That's just a great character arc, a great story in general. It is the best sports movie of all time, started a long-running franchise, and remains a legendary film to this day. Number 8 is Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, a movie that, much like Terminator 2, Aliens, basically every sequel that I said on this list, expands upon everything that worked in the original, in A New Hope, as the characters are a lot more compelling. Whether you're talking about like Luke, who is sent off to this other planet in order to really train as a Jedi. It's really sort of his origin story in this franchise. Or Han doing his own thing, having a sort of a romance with Leia, and having a past that haunts him. It also has one of the best twists in movie history with the I Am Your Father reveal. One of the iconic scenes in movie history. And, of course, there's some great new additions with Lando Calrissian, who is getting his own movie, which I'm not really a big fan of, and Yoda, of course, who is just a legendary character in this franchise, and it draws out big emotions by the time you get to the end. This was peak Star Wars to me. It is my favorite of the Star Wars franchise. That brings us to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Now, I really struggled whether I should include Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark or Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade on this list, but if I'm being honest, I will put The Last Crusade on the top simply because I think it's the most satisfying and emotional of all the movies in the Indiana Jones franchise, and it just does everything that I want from this franchise. So, right off the bat, it's a very funny film. I think it has the most fun bits of the entire Indiana Jones franchise. It moves at a faster, more brisker pace, and I think I'm more inclined to movies that move quickly, this movie being the most fastest pace of the Indiana Jones movies. This is one, probably because of its humor and its fast pace, is probably more rewatchable than Raiders of the Lost Ark. But what really stood out to me about this movie is that it was a satisfying conclusion to Indiana Jones' arc, basically. Even though he has films after this, you bring in Sean Connery as his father, and the two just have great chemistry, dynamic between one another, in which, by the end of the movie, Indiana Jones saves his father over the treasure. And so I just think that's such a great conclusion to Indiana Jones' arc, and in my mind, the definitive conclusion to the franchise. Number 6 is The Matrix. For me, this is probably the best sci-fi action movie of all time. And the reason for that is because it's just so creative, so fresh and new, so different, even, more than 20 years after this movie came out. It's still so creative, fresh, and new, and it takes several influences, puts them all together in a blender, and just in doing so, made one of the most fascinating movies of all time, where you have heavily visualized, stylized action sequences, where you get some really iconic moments in there, and just a fantastic world building, where the audience, as Neo is learning about the Matrix, the audience is also learning along with him. And it's just a classic hero's journey about a guy, this nobody basically, that gets swept away into this world and becomes this incredibly important character. I just think that's very compelling. Also, just a very creative movie, so I think this is the best sci-fi action movie of all time. Kicking off the top 5 is The Dark Knight. This is actually my brother's favorite movie of all time, and I can't argue with that. This is, of course, a fantastic movie, and this is just a very special superhero movie for a bunch of different reasons, mostly because it transcends this comic book movie, superhero movie genre. So what Christopher Nolan did was, instead of taking influences from all these previous superhero movie blockbusters and did all the tropes that they did, what he very wisely did was take influences from these crime thrillers like David Fincher's Seven, and in doing so, created a very special comic book movie that has emotionally complex storytellings from the beginning to end, where by the end of it, Batman is the one that chooses to take responsibility for the things he didn't do in order to preserve Harvey Dent as the leader. It's very emotionally complex. Also, you just get a fantastic version of the Joker in here, where Heath Ledger just disappears into this disturbing role. And so, for my money, as time passes, I rewatched this movie a few weeks back. It still holds up, and I would say every time I watch it, I like it more. And so, it's safe to say this is the best superhero movie of all time. And then we have Die Hard. Not only is this movie the greatest action movie ever made, but it's also the greatest Christmas movie ever made. It's just such a fantastic, iconic, awesome action movie of the 80s that just happens to be a Christmas movie. So what makes this movie so good? Well, it's so entertaining, rewatchable from beginning to end. And you also just really get this great, compelling character journey for Bruce Willis's John McClane, who doesn't want to be the action hero. He doesn't want to have to do what he does in this movie. But he just happens to be the only person in the building that can do something. And so therefore, he has to step into action. And he's just a guy trying to do the right thing. That's so compelling. And you, of course, you also get one of the great movie villains of all time in Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman, who I just think nails the performance. He has such great dynamic banter with John McClane when they communicate over walkie-talkies. There's just some iconic moments, iconic lines of dialogue. And so, to me, this is very safe to say, perfect action movie, greatest action movie of all time. Kicking off our top three, Ghostbusters. This is just a fun concept for a movie about these weirdo scientists who start a business to hunt down ghosts, which is pretty fun, yet silly, but it's executed perfectly through every single detail. There's some great, iconic characters and their dynamics with one another, where you have Venkman, Ray Stantz, Winston Zeddemore, Egon Spengler. They all just have a great dynamic with each other. They're all sarcastic, they're all funny, and that's what makes the characters so memorable and good. So much so that in the Legacy sequel, Ghostbusters Afterlife, they returned and we were all pleased with it. And also nailed the tone so it's accessible to people of all ages. It's not going overtly horror, it's not going outright comedy, and finds the perfect mix between the two. And so, therefore, it's accessible to broad audiences, and it's for all ages. You also just get some memorable, iconic sequences, whether you're talking about, of course, the big, gigantic Stay Puft Marshmallow Man at the end. It's just remained an icon. This is a movie that kicked off several spin-offs and sequels, but none of them are as good as the original Ghostbusters. Our runner-up is Jurassic Park. This is just a groundbreaking film, and for me personally, my favorite Steven Spielberg movie, as the visualization of how dinosaurs are brought back to life is absolutely phenomenal. The effects still look good to this day, but it also in general just tackles a fascinating concept, bringing dinosaurs back to life. And while it's a very sciencey film, it's all interesting when our characters are talking to each other through the discussions that they're having about the dangers and how this technology may change the world. But when the thrills do happen and the dinosaurs do start eating people, it provides all the thrills that it needs to for you to be on the edge of your seat from beginning to end. Also just has a really talented cast here. Of course you got Sam Neill in the lead, but when you rewatch this movie, you just notice, hey, Samuel L. Jackson is in this movie. It also just has a memorable, iconic score from John Williams, I believe, he's just a great composer. This is one of his best scores to me. For me, this is my favorite Spielberg movie, and he's got a whole bunch of movies that I absolutely love, but this is the one that I just really enjoy because it's the most fascinating one to me. But in first place for me, Back to the Future. This is, simply put, the perfect movie to me. It is my favorite movie of all time that just has a fantastic premise about a boy from 1985 going back to 1955 and is trying to go back to 1985 without messing up the timeline. Doing so, he runs into his parents, which he has to fix the moral dilemma that he's in. And so much so that there's literally a plotline where a mother falls in love with a son, but it doesn't go too far. It doesn't push the boundaries of that. And so you have lightning in a bottle execution with this film. Michael J. Fox just perfectly cast as Marty McFly, and he has a great dynamic with Christopher Lloyd as Dr. Emmett Brown. It's just the perfect casting. You also have Crispin Glover, Leah Thompson, just all these people who were born to play this role. It's tough to imagine anybody else in this movie. Very iconic sequences here. The DeLorean, of course. Such a humorous movie as well. It's not trying to go over comedy, but it's a very funny film. And it has all the edge of your seat thrills that you want without having to have big gigantic CGI fest. It can just be tense at times because the tension is building and you're wondering, is he going to make it back in time? You just get a series of loopholes of events that are fascinating, and with the script, every single line of dialogue matters. Like, some little story about how their parents met is very important later on when he travels back in time to 1955.
Strange. What was it, George? Bird watching?
What, Lorraine? He's a peeping Tom.
Just a simple gag will pay off at the end, and so it's very important. So, to me, this is the perfect movie where it was just the right film that whatever movie they were trying to make, Robert Zemeckis was trying to make, he absolutely executed it perfectly. So it is not only the best time travel movie, best sci-fi movie, best movie... Oh, my lights went off. It's just one of the best movies ever made, and in my case, my favorite movie of all time. There you have it, that's my ranking. Down below in the comment section, share your picks for your favorite movies of all time over on my channel. I have more content like this. Check those out right now. Click that like button, be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I will see you in the next one.